All right, everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Fearcast. This is the podcast dedicated to OCD and anxiety spectrum disorders and getting your life back. I'm your host, Kevin Foss, and I'm a licensed therapist specializing in OCD and anxiety disorders. And thank you all, everybody, for joining me for today's episode. This is going to be a challenging episode for me. It's going to be I'm going to do my darndest to get through it. It's a question that is kind of theology-based. So we're going to be talking a little bit about religious scrupulosity. So I'm going to be doing my best to not insult or alienate or speak wrong or offend too many people. So we're going to see how it all shakes out. But as many of you know, this is a question and answer based podcast. If you have a question about OCD or anxiety spectrum disorders, you can send me a question. Go to fearcastpodcast.com and click on the submit a question link, and you can send me a kind of an email-y type of question there. You could also send me an audio question, and there are two ways to get in audio questions, probably three ways to send in audio questions that are best. Audio questions get sent to the top of the list, as is happening today. So you can go over to Fearcast Podcast and click on the speech pipe or speak pipe button there and record your question. You can also go over to Instagram, and I am Fearcast Podcast over at Instagram, and you can send me your question over there. Send me the DM. You click on the little microphone button, and you just record there, and that's how it all gets to me. So, and I do see them all, and I have a backlog of things, and some of the questions I kind of want to get some more professional answers on, or more kind of other voices in, and that's why some of them take a little bit longer than others, but I get there. So, but yeah, man, I don't have anything else at the top of the list other than to apologize for not having an episode last week. So I typically would record on like a Thursday, and I have a little bit of time scheduled out or carved out for that. But last week, the tummy bug went through our house, and it started with my son, actually, which is a surprise. Typically, the girl gets it first, the big baby gets it first, and then we all get it at some point. But she got it first, and then my boy got it, and then my wife got it, and then later on I got it. So it was super fun. So what we had to do was I had to stay home from work on Thursday, which meant I wasn't going to be in to do it. And then everyone else was sick, and I couldn't get to the office, and you get how it goes. So I apologize for the delay for anybody who's looking for an episode, but that's kind of what happens sometimes. So, but either way, we got this episode up. Actually, so there's kind of a twofer for today. So one question, I'm going to play David's question here. He has a question about some medication, but I just kind of want to throw it out there and then ask David to also go back one episode to episode, I think it was 260. Let me just double check which one it is. Yes, indeed, 260 with Dr. Sanjay Saxena, where we talk about medication. And that very, very long episode is likely to answer a lot of his questions. But then I want to get onto Katie's question just immediately after that. So David, here is your question. And then Katie, we're going to play your question and then get onto that.
Hey, hello. I'm a big fan of your podcast. My name is Dave, and I was ringing up with a question. My question would be, I suffer from general anxiety disorder, and I think sometimes some OCD elements of it. I've listened to your podcast about the kind of crossover between those two things, like what is OCD, what is anxiety disorder, and how in some ways the treatment for them is exactly the same. I've been put on medication for I'm taking sertraline, quite low dose, 25 milligrams. I was just wondering what your thoughts are on medication. I have also had therapy, ERP, and I've got a good therapist, and we've been discussing the various things, and I feel that's really helped. But what are your opinions on medication mixed with ERP therapy? How effective do you think it'd be? And is sertraline good? And what would be the long-term sort of prognosis for sertraline for those kind of anxiety, OCD disorders? Thank you very much. I hope you can answer that question sometime. Okay, bye.
So as people of the Christian faith, we're told to cast our cares upon the Lord and to ask God boldly for things and ask and you shall receive, etc. But when it's like 3 a.m. and my emetophobic daughter wakes me up because of fear of vomit and she wants me to ask God to take it away or to help her, and mind you, we're both in ERP therapy. But like as a person studying OCD and how to overcome and such, and like knowing she has emetophobia and religious scrupulosity, I don't know where the line is or if there even is a line between exercising our faith and doing a compulsion. I know prayer can be a compulsion, as I've heard a lot on these podcasts, but how do I teach my 10-year-old daughter about that and also expect her to trust God and believe that she can cast her cares upon the Lord? And then there's a part B to this question. So like this faith, right, tells us that we can do all things through Christ who strengthens us. And I feel like we're told by all religious leaders that we can do nothing of our own power and it's only by prayer and supplication. But it sure seems like basically what we have to do to overcome OCD is by our own mind power, or it's our own letting go of, or our own choice to remove compulsions and change our thinking. So I'm not sure how to reconcile those two thoughts, that God heals versus do all this mental gymnastics to heal. And I know to get strong, you got to lift weights. One doesn't become a bodybuilder just by prayer. And I know this is kind of a similar idea. Building the new muscle of ERP and CBT and ACT and all of that to recover. But then that Christian voice comes back in saying, you've taken matters into your own hands and you've stopped trusting God with things that are out of your control. And so, I don't know, can you help me? What's God's part and what's my part? I'm just not sure that an OCD mind can see this clearly. I know that you are not God, but I do listen to your podcast regularly and trust your opinion. And I know that you are a man of religion or of faith. And so it would be great if you could help me out with this. Thanks.
All right. So both of y'all, thank you for sending in those questions. They're both really good questions. And certainly, David, I did schedule Dr. Saxena to answer your question, and I just totally forgot to pair those two together and put your name on it. But yeah, I hope that answered the majority of the questions that you had. Ultimately, it sounded like from my conversation with him, medication is one of those things that can certainly work long term. It's certainly something that you should be in communication with your doctor about continuously throughout the process. If something is not quite working, or you're getting some sort of weird side effect, certainly talk with your doctor about that. I think it's also worth, and I talk to my clients about this, that if they're finding that it's not having an effect, go talk to your doctor about it, right? They, as Dr. Saxena was talking about, they may be able to supplement with something. They may be able to change something. Maybe it's a dosage issue. It needs to go up, needs to go down. But ultimately, it sounds like from talking with him, medication is going to be something. And I say it sounds like I've never encountered this before. I say it sounds like as a qualifier because I again, had it drilled into me by previous supervisors and ethics professors that I, as a licensed MFT, am not a licensed MD, am not a physician, so I cannot prescribe medication. So I just don't want my voice being attached to the idea of like, Kevin said SSRIs are totally fine and you can do whatever you want. Slow that down. If that's what you're hearing, slow it back. And that's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is, from me relying on the expertise of Dr. Saxena, he's saying it is something that can be that you can use over the long term. I've also worked with clients who have been on these medications for decades, and they are doing fine, or some of them are still struggling. And in which case, guess what I say? Go talk to your doctor, bruh, or lady, or whatever it may be. And I just say, go. So it's, so I hope that answers your question. So again, thank you so much, David. So Katie, I want to answer your question. And then Katie sent in a second question, which I typically don't answer two questions from the same person so close together, but it's a entirely different thing. And I'm getting two professionals in to talk about it. So that's coming in soon. All right. So Katie's question, Katie, your question was so, there's so much to it. And I feel torn on trying to answer it because I want to try to honor the question as much as I can. And there's kind of two sides, right? I want to be able to, like when I'm working with a client if they're in my office, like we're going to be exploring some of these ideas of faith and doubt and how to integrate the idea of faith and, OCD treatment, right? Or faith and modern medicine, as it were, right? There's this idea that a lot of people get caught up in, and I think a lot of what Katie is talking about is kind of being stuck in between these two places where it feels as if these two ideas are incompatible, or if you're doing one, you cannot do the other, because it is like they just cannot be integrated. I just don't think that is true. So, for someone, if you have these questions and you're struggling with them, I really encourage you to go work with a therapist who's able to kind of address some of these questions and get into this a little bit with you. And, isn't trying to be your pastor necessarily, but is able to kind of look at some of these verses and some of these ideas that feel challenging, that feel limiting maybe, and see if we can kind of better understand them, pull them apart a little bit, and to see if perhaps the interpretation that you have may not line up with what the Bible or whatever religious text or religious traditions or what have you, what they actually say about you, right? Do they not line up? Or is there a way to integrate them, and is there a better way to understand them, right? And that's one of the things that we would do. There's one of the things I learned early on, I learned this from Alec Pollard, is that when you're working with someone with religious scrupulosity, sometimes it just takes a lot longer to get into exposures. And I've kind of adopted this as well, is that I want to spend a little bit more time on the front end of treatment, on maybe the cognitive restructuring piece, to kind of pull it apart a little bit more, to understand a little bit more, to kind of not as a way of like doing like full corrective theology or trying to convince somebody of something, but because faith within OCD is so intertwined and is so fraught, and it can feel like if you just kind of rush into doing exposures, that it feels like I get a lot of resistance then, or a lot more resistance to doing exposures at that point, because it can feel like a challenge to their faith in doing it that quickly. And ultimately, I don't want it to be that. I want to get this grounding in faith, this understanding of what your faith actually says, so that you can use your faith as a driver, as a motivator, as an encourager, as a support as you go and do exposures that feel super scary and feel like they are violating. And I say feel because it's what the little OCD voice is saying, that it says it is dangerous, or you're doing it wrong, or if you don't do it a certain way, you're going to be offending God, or you're going to be going to hell, or you're not faithful enough, right? We want to be addressing some of those narratives first before they get into it, so I'm not having to like be in the middle of an exposure and have somebody white knuckling it, or in their head ultimately checking out or doing compulsions constantly. In the process, instead, they're relying on their faith and what they believe God says for them or wants for them overall as we're going through treatment. So that was a lot of preamble, Katie. I'm sorry for that, and anybody else out there who's listening to that. So before I get into, so there are kind of two ultimate questions in here that you were talking about. So again, one, it sounded like, the one question is like, how can someone do ERP without compulsions and believe that they are, casting their cares upon God, right? And kind of have faith in God to heal, right? And I hear that, and that's certainly a hard place to be. But again, it feels like that we're kind of saying like God can't heal through exposure and response prevention, or if you're doing exposure and response prevention or therapeutic work, that you're not relying on God to heal, right? And the second one is you kind of said what's God's part and what's my part, feeling like it's all on your shoulders or it's all on God's shoulders, and is it both? And I kind of want to pull some of those apart a little bit. All right, so a couple things that were just coming to mind as I was listening to your question is we need to remember that, we have great examples in the Bible. And so I'll do this. I'll also acknowledge I'm coming at this from a Christian's perspective, because I am one, and from Katie's question, she is one. So I know that some of this will not apply to some of the listeners out there, and I hope you don't just immediately shut it down or shut down this question, because what I want to do is ultimately highlight some ways that you can use faith and concepts from your faith in a way to bolster and support your OCD work, as opposed to feeling like you have to avoid it. And I would encourage anybody out there to go to their pastor, go to their imam, go to their rabbi, go to their witch doctor, I don't know, whatever you're doing, to have these conversations with them about what their fears mean. And hopefully this will also incorporate a trained and compassionate and spiritually respectful therapist who can help integrate all of these perspectives into developing a program for you that is respectful of your faith and that incorporates your faith as you are moving through this. So as I was kind of reading this, we need to remember that, we have great examples in the Bible, both Old Testament and Hebrew Scripture, or New Testament and Hebrew Scriptures, that we've got examples of people asking God for things, and we've got examples of people being encouraged to ask God and reach out to God, and we need to remember that sometimes God says no to our prayers, and that sucks. And I don't know why that happens, but it does. And I don't get to have those answers, and nor do you. And that sucks for us. That's a reality. And I'm saying it sucks, and you can disagree with that philosophically or theologically, but I mean, from a human perspective, man, it sucks. Because we've got, all right, one thing that was coming up was, let's see here. Like the Matthew 7:7. I wrote this down. So it says, "Ask and it will be given to you. Seek and you will find. Knock and the door will be open to you. For everyone who asks receives, and the one who seeks finds, and the one who knocks, and to the one who knocks it will be opened." And it goes on and on. So it kind of have this example of like, all right, we have this idea. Boy, you know what? If you ask for it, God will grant it to you. All right, great, let's do it. And then you have examples from Job, where at the end of Job reasonably asks God, like, hey, what in the heck was going on? And I'm not going to bore you with the whole passage because I think it's a several chapter long thing. But God just goes, how dare you ask this question? Like, you don't get to ask this kind of question. So what do we do with those two? We have these two. And we have another example. So Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane before he's going to be crucified. He goes, hey, God, maybe don't have me be killed on the cross. Like, that would be super great. But your will be done. So I guess if you need it to be done, I guess, I'm going to go with it. But, if you could, like, that would be great if I don't have to. So God kind of said no. And Jesus also showed this willingness to do something that he didn't want to do, but did it anyways because it was God's will. What do we do with all that? I think what we need to do with this is hold this in this very uncomfortable tension and this ambiguity. And I think that's what we talk about in OCD land, right? There is an element of saying, there's an uncertainty component to this, but as a faithful person, we go, I'm going to trust that God has a bigger plan. If the answer is no, or if the answer is not yet, or if the answer is maybe, or if the answer is wait and see, or if we don't get an answer, right? And that's really hard for a faithful person. But that's where we rely on our faith as an endurance to bolster our endurance, as an endurance builder in a sense, right? So let's see. So to get to some of the questions then more specifically, so you're asking God to take away, all right, what do you do about asking God to take away the obsession, right? So what can you do in that situation when your daughter's coming to you and in this high stress, asking, asking to, you want to say, like, cast your concerns upon the Lord, or you want, if she's saying, hey, I want this gone, can we ask God to take this away? I totally get that. I want that to be the case too. And I'll also say this. I think there's an and in here, not an either or. I think the and in here is, well, first off, let me do this. So asking God to take away OCD. I think there's a very natural, normal thing for a faithful person to ask for that type of, miracle, this type of blessing, this type of gift, to be able to take away this painful, uncomfortable, awful thing, right? So on the one hand, it can absolutely be compulsive. It can be problematic, right? If you're asking it constantly over and over and over and over and over and over and over again, what you might be doing is playing with the wishing compulsion, right? Wishing, like hoping and dreaming and wanting and desiring for a life that you don't currently have, right? It can ultimately leave you feeling distraught and dismayed and disappointed, right? The other is, if you're asking it over and over and over and over again, are you ultimately just asking it just to try to get like emotional relief? I think some people might be doing it in that way, and that can be unhealthy. Now, if there's got to be a limit, a functional way for you to ask for that, as praying boldly within your faith and asking God for what you want, right? Ask and you shall receive. Sometimes, maybe, asterisk, your results may vary. But ask for it and ask boldly for it. And also expect that sometimes God is going to say no, right? So we have a great example of this, right? In 2 Corinthians, Paul asks to have the thorn in his flesh removed. So for some of you who aren't aware, Paul, who used to be Saul, had an encounter with Jesus on the road to Damascus and was turned and didn't burned. But he describes having this thorn put in his flesh, and we don't really know what that is. People allude to it may be his eyesight, but who knows what it could be, right? But it's this thing that nagged him, and he hated it. And he asked for it to be removed, and God said no. And I love this example because it's like, yeah, if anybody is going to be able to get get a solid from God, it might be Paul. And I mean, it might also be Jesus as well, but that crucifixion part was real key to Jesus land in Christianity. So, but with Paul, I was like, well, shouldn't he? But the answer was no, right? So if you read through that section of 2 Corinthians, it kind of talks about this element of kind of shifting the way he views it. So I'm gonna read this out of the Message because it sounds less confusing, but it's still confusing. So he says, because of the extravagance of those revelations, so I wouldn't get a big head, I was given the gift of a handicap to keep me in constant touch with my limitations. Satan's angel did his best to keep me down, when in fact, what he in fact did was push me to my knees. No danger, then, of walking around high and mighty. At first, I didn't think of it as a gift and begged God to remove it. 3 times I did that, and he told me, my grace is enough, it's all you need, and my strength comes into its own in your weakness. Then he goes on to say, once I heard that, I was glad to let it happen. I quit focusing on the handicap and began appreciating the gift. It was a case of Christ's strength moving in on my weakness. Now I take limitations in stride and with good cheer, and these limitations that cut me down to size, abuse, accidents, opposition, bad breaks. I just let Christ take over. So the weaker I get, the stronger I become. Now, I love this. Because there's a strong element of acceptance in this, an acceptance in moving forward in life, recognizing that this what could be a limitation, what is a limitation, in a struggle and an obstacle, and what he calls what the writer of the Message is, which of the Message is it's kind of a rewriting of the Bible in just regular words and no verses, no verse numbers in there, just so you can read it as a story by Eugene Peterson. So it's this giant thing. Anyways, so you can check it out. But it kind of says, like, yeah, instead of sitting and fighting and being angry at it, I acknowledged it and I moved forward with it. And it is hard and is annoying and is painful, but it's the thing that keeps me connected to God. It's the thing that reminds me of God or pulls me back to God. Now, I know I'm probably reading into this or interpreting this differently, but it's one of those ways that he was reframing this for himself. I also want to say this. It is really hard to reframe physical or mental illness as a positive. And I can't expect, and I don't think you should expect anybody to do that in your time. People can and might come to that on their own, but there is room for being angry and being upset and being hurt and feeling limited. And that's where we can meet them in their pain and in their struggle. During that time, and I think for your daughter in this, is I think we can't expect her to view OCD as something positive right now or something good. I know I've talked about having an OCD superpower and being able to think about a lot of things all at once and being able to be sensitive to others and being cautious and being thoughtful and being kind of working extensively hard on things. And there's a lot of good things that can come from OCD and from mental health. I mean, I was reading through this recently, ADHD 2.0, and it talks about ADHD not as a limitation, but kind of as this double-edged sword, where it's this thing where you go, it's tough to focus. It can be hard to stay on task. It can be hard to remember people's names and do all that. And it can also be something that can have you view the world in an entirely brand new way that no one else has. And it can be the person with the ADHD brain can be the person that, sucks at an interview, but leaves that interview having an epiphany of the next big thing or the next big invention. And that's the superpower. So I'm not expecting you to view that, nor should we. All right. So what can you do then? Acknowledge the difficulty, right? Acknowledge the difficulty. Validate that pain, refocus on what they can do, and reduce the focus on what they can't, right? There's a tendency for us to focus on our limitations and go, that sucks. But we can acknowledge that, yeah, it is hard. And yes, there are some difficulties, and that there are a lot of things that you still can do. And emphasize what you can do despite the limitation, and highlight all that you have done with that limitation. I know we're calling it a limitation, and however you view it, if you want to view it differently or call it different, and if you think it's offensive, I'm calling it a limitation. I'm sorry. Some people would. And I'm sorry if it's offensive. I don't know what to tell you. But what I'm getting at here is we can still meet them on the emotional level and say, hey, this sucks. And you are still great, and you are still wonderful, and you can still do quite a bit, and you are doing quite a bit with all of this limitation. And also say this, I've done this with myself and my lung stuff. I think I've talked about this before. And no, it's not the same. It's different. We all have our own thing, but I've got garbage lungs and sinuses for a lot of different reasons. And I would get sick and not be able to be athletic, and I barely was able to do a whole lot. But from surgeries, I was encouraged to get into music, to learn to wind instruments so I can boost up my lung strength. From music, I got interested in music in general. And from that, I started playing different instruments. Started with saxophone, and then went to bassoon for some reason, and then went over to bass guitar. And from bass guitar, that's been my main instrument for, like 20 years. And from that, I was able to get into, I had like a brief interest in when I started going to church, I was like, there's a youth group. Oh, that youth group has a band, I guess. Maybe they need a bass player for said band. So I asked if I could play, and they let me. And it's one of the things that helped me stay and keep me going back to church, and then get involved with faith from there. But it started for the most part, with music that kind of kept me there. And from that helped me get more involved with church. So music for me has been an important part of my faith, and I don't think I would be there had it not been for my garbage lungs. Now, do I expect everybody to have a story like that? No. But I want to point out that there's a way to kind of make that shift, but we also need to wait for someone to be there in that time. Okay, so let me keep getting onto this. So I want to give an alternative, right? So I think there's a way that we can ask boldly for God to take things away, but also alongside that say, and ask God for the strength to get through it, to endure it, to learn from it, to have confidence to face uncertainty, to have the strength to use ERP tools effectively. This, I think, is a really great confident prayer that you can have and you can use. So it says, hey, God, if you have the ability to take this away, that would be awesome. And if not, give me the strength, and even on the way to taking it away, give me the strength to get through it. Give me the endurance, give me the wisdom to utilize the tools and to apply the tools that my therapist is giving me. Give me the ability to face uncertainty. Give me the capacity to do this. Help me have confidence that I can utilize these tools, right? So it's important to also incorporate both of these, because it says, yes, I'm asking for your help and I rely on you, and I'm asking for your help to push through and to do these things that are working, that can work. Okay, so I know this is super long-winded and this is taking up a lot of time, but let's get to the next part of the question. So that question was kind of about like, what's God's part, what's my part, right? And there's that guilt that you were talking about over like doing ERP, and if I do ERP, I'm not trusting God, right? Or I'm either trusting God in this, so therefore I have to not do ERP, right? And I think this is bonkers. All right, I think this is a lie straight from OCD that says either or. It is it's calling into this OCD level black and whiteness, this OCD kind of purity of whatever the heck it is, and it's purely a distraction and I think a tool of OCD. Okay, so. You mentioned the phrase, like, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me, right? So that's from Philippians 4. So go look it up for anybody who's not. But there's a whole section that's like that I would encourage you to read. It's from Philippians 4:10 all the way to 13. The verse itself is where is it? Is 13. But read through it. He's ultimately saying, I'm not going to read the whole thing, but he's ultimately saying, like, I've had good times and I've had hard times, and I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me, right? What he's ultimately saying in there is, I can endure all manner of struggle and difficulty and hardship in good times through Christ who strengthens me, right? But he's not saying like I can do things that are impossible. It's like I can fly through Christ who strengthens me, right? I can see through walls and shoot laser out of my eyeballs through Christ who strengthens me. He's saying I can be resilient and not caught up in pain and wallow in the hard times, right? God's giving him the strength and the endurance to get through the difficulty. But he's also not getting caught up in the entitlement to goodness or the disappointment when it turns from goodness to hardness through Christ who strengthens him, right? And that's a hard place to be, right? It's a hard place to be in that where it feels like it. Well, you get the idea. All right. What I think we can view, though, I think we can view OCD treatment as a gift and a blessing from God that you should take advantage of, right? So it's not this either or. It's we're asking God for help, and God says, "Hey, why don't you try this ERP thing? It's really cool and kind of works." So I have this. So this is a great story, and it's kind of a joke, I suppose, but it goes like this. So imagine there's this guy, right? And there's this flood going on, and he's trying not to drown. So he like scurries up to the highest point and gets to the top of his roof, and he goes, "Oh my God, please save me from this. Help me get out of this." And as he's praying so fervently and strongly that a guy on a kayak comes by and he goes, "Hey, jump on! Like the water's rising." And he goes, "No, it's cool. Pass on me. I'm praying for God for help, and God's going to help me. He's a super faithful guy. So the boat goes away. And then next, or the kayak goes away. And then next, a boat comes up because it's getting a little bit higher. And he says, get in, I'm here to rescue you. And the guy in the middle of his prayer goes, no. I'm praying for God to help me. God's gonna help me out. So the boat goes away. So the waters keep rising. It gets up to his neck, and he's almost about to drown. And he's praying for God to help him out. And a helicopter comes by and lowers down a ladder. And the helicopter says, "Get in the helicopter. We're gonna save you." And he goes, "No, God's gonna save me." And then all of a sudden, the water rises, and he drowns. Right. So he goes up to heaven, and he meets God. And he says, "God, what the heck? I prayed so fervently that you would save me. I was faithful my whole life. I was strong and all this stuff, and I listened to you, and I wanted to rely solely on you." And God goes, "What are you talking about? I sent a kayak, and I sent a boat, and I sent a helicopter, and you didn't do any of those things." And that's the end of the joke. Anyways, I like it. I think it's fun. But it's this idea that, like, we pray for miracles and then we don't take the opportunity to take the miracles when they're there, right? What if the miracle was using the therapeutic tools that were accessible to you? What if acceptance and commitment? What if exposure and response prevention? What if facing your fears was the miracle? What if that was God giving something that could work, right? Now, Am I saying that this is a miracle that is only accessible to people of faith? Well, of course not. Am I saying that that the people who created them were God's divine whatever and speaking through them? I don't know I don't know either. But what I'm saying is, let's use the tools that we have available to us and pray for God's help and God's miracles in the process, right? And we have examples of people living by faith. Again, we have examples of again, praying and being faithful and then putting it into action, right? You think about the disciples throwing their nets on the other side of the boat because they didn't catch any fish all night. And Jesus was like, "Hey, do this thing." And they didn't just go, "No, it's not going to work. I'm waiting for God to just like produce fish onto my boat." They had to throw the nets, right? They had to do the thing. And then they caught all this fish. But guess what? They also had to pull in the nets. They had to do the hard work, right? Abraham going up the mountain with Isaac. Abraham was told, "Go up and sacrifice your son." And I bet he didn't really want to, unless Isaac was just an awful child. And then I get it, stab the child. That makes sense. But he had to go up the mountain and he had to go do it. Okay. So we have to also take action, not just pray for the miracle to happen. We also do it, right? And it's both and. We believe that God can do it, and we believe that we can also put the effort in to do it as well. And through the combination of these two, we're going to get somewhere. All right. So remember that OCD also starts with its accusation and then works backwards, right? And asks you to find the evidence, right? So it's saying in this process, you're not being faithful. It's asking you to prove that you're faithful and make sure that you are doing it or that your daughter's doing it. But this is where we're practicing ignoring and just rolling our eyes to the OCD voice. Again, as I said, I think this is OCD's voice just trying to get the worst of you. Or the best of you. I don't know, however it might work. All right, so I know where this is a long one. I'm going to try to tighten this up real quick. All right, we're going to button this up. So one of the things that we can do, one of the things I would encourage you to do in the process of continuing to do your exposure and response prevention, and being there with your daughter to be empathetic and compassionate and supportive and speaking to the emotion part of it and speaking to the and between faith and ERP. Let's cast our faith on God and do our ERP. If you haven't read Can Christianity Cure My Obsessive Compulsive Disorder, I would encourage you to do it. The author's name is eluding me right now, and that's frustrating because I've said it 1,000 times. It might come to me. We'll see. But either way, Can Christianity Cure My Obsessive Compulsive Disorder? He has this idea of, and it's kind of this 3-step, and I know I've talked about this before. Step 1, we acknowledge that we've got OCD. Acknowledge that you have OCD, which means you have a pattern of unwanted intrusive thoughts that produces a whole lot of anxiety that requires compulsive behaviors to try to eliminate, neutralize, help to avoid that fear, all right, or make that story go away, right? There is this pattern that is going on. And step 2, we give the responsibility of the offense over to God, right? The offensive part according to OCD in this, is that if you do ERP, you are usurping God's power in trying to heal you, right? You're not being faithful to God in this. You're saying, I got this. This is all on me. And there is an aspect, there is a part that is on you as we do this work. You have to make the choice to do certain things, right? Abraham had to make the choice to go to the mountain. What is it? Joseph had to show up and answer the questions to Pharaoh, right? And fill in the blank. I'm going to keep going through examples because they're all blanking on my head right now. But we have to show up too in this process, okay? We have to, the door is open, we have to walk through the door. There's an action on our end, right? So we have OCD, 2, the responses to God, or the offenses to God. We're going to give it over to God. God is the one who's going to be the person who is or is not offended by what you're doing, not you taking the responsibility for the offense on your own and speaking for God in that way, right? Let God be the person who's going to be offended. But remember, God also knows you, knows what OCD is, knows what ERP treatment is, and I think wants you to be healthy and happy and thriving and joyful and free to live life and to be a faithful person and to drive and to be with your kids and to watch movies where someone's going to throw up in it and to use knives and to be around your kids and fill in the blank with whatever your fear is. I think God wants that too, and recognizes that there is this balance in that what it feels like is offensive to you also can bring freedom, right? Or you get the idea. So, and then step 3 is do the exposure anyways. So the book outlines it in more detail. However, that is the thesis. It should be a pamphlet. It's a longer book than that, but it should be a pamphlet. Anyways, so here's what I want to offer. I want to encourage you to use a couple of statements in response to this, right? So in response to that voice that says, you're being unfaithful by doing ERP, we're not going to get into a fight with it. So we're going to say, maybe I am being unfaithful, but I'm going to go to ERP because God wants me to be free from the shackles of my obsession. So I'm going to do it anyways. You could use the phrase, maybe I'm not being faithful, but I'm going to do this in the name of faith. And I know that sounds backwards. It's going to feel backwards, but you're saying, I'm not going to listen to or pay attention to or argue with this. I'm going to do this in the name of faith as if this is the faithful step. It doesn't feel right, but remember, you have OCD. A lot of things don't feel right, and we're going to do it anyways, right? The third option, maybe I'm being offensive to God, but He knows, and I'll leave it up to Him to be offended. And I'm going to do the exposure anyways. Again, this is all kind of plays on the same theme, but we're saying we're not trying to give into this either or trying to buy into and engage with the narrative that is just tangential and rounded up and is ignoring big swaths of what I think God wants for us. So now, I hope this helps answer your question. I know a lot of your questions has been really conceptual and kind of bigger ideas rather than specific exposure ideas, so I didn't really offer a whole lot of specific things. But I hope this gives you an idea about ways to think differently about scrupulosity and think about different ways that you can apply this to your life and approach your treatment with your therapist and integrating OCD or integrating your faith into it rather than having it be this separate thing. I don't think they are separate things. I think we use them together. So, Katie, thank you so much for this question, and David, thank you so much for your question. And I hope the episode with Dr. Saxena was helpful in answering your questions. So, everybody, if you are a theologian or a much smarter person on theology and would like to add your 2 cents in, send me a message over at Instagram, put it on the episode page, send me an email, and let me know, and I will read them. I will share them in a future episode or like a supplemental, like mini episode or whatever it might be, if there's enough criticism or there's enough feedback and guidance in this. But thank you again so much for these questions, everybody. As you know, the Fearcast runs on your questions, and it runs on your questions, and if without you, there's no podcast. So thank you so much for letting me be a part of your recovery. So until next time, everybody, take a risk, challenge yourself, and don't take your brain too seriously. Bye. Thank you for listening to the Fearcast. If you would like your question answered in a future episode, please click on the Submit a Question link at fearcastpodcast.com. If you would like your question answered sooner, please send me a recording of your question to questions@fearcastpodcast.com or by sending me an audio message through Instagram by DMing me at fearcastpodcast on Instagram. If you like the Fearcast, please write a review on your podcast platform of choice. Please remember that the Fearcast is not a substitute for psychotherapy. If you need a little bit of help in your recovery, please go over to fearcastpodcast.com and click on the Find Help link, and there's going to be some information for you there. So until next time, take a risk, challenge yourself, and don't take your brain too seriously.